Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast. We're always talking everything college hoops. You could have been anywhere else in the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. Listen, we are trying to give you some serious off-season content that you guys can dig your ears into during this run-up to the NBA draft. And luckily, we've had kind of the perfect person on for this particular podcast. Eric Fawcett of Gator Country, of NBA Canada, of North Pole Hoops, has joined us to talk a little NBA draft and a couple of other items as well, of course, as we always talk about with Eric. Please give Eric a follow at E Fawcett, EFAWC, ETT7, capital E, of course. You can follow him at Gator Country for his Florida Hoops work. You can follow him at NBA Canada for his NBA draft work. He has an unbelievable piece up on RJ Barrett. He has a great piece that was actually translated into Japanese on Rui Hachimura, which is an unbelievable honor. Here are a couple of things we talked about with Eric. Number one, we talked about the NBA profile. We talked about the Final Four in the NBA conference finals right now. We talked about how there's CJ from Lehigh, 4-year player, Steph, 3-year player from Davidson, Kawhi, 2-year player from San Diego State, Giannis being Giannis, and Dame, coming from Weber State. And maybe how does that translate into this year's draft? Who should we be paying attention to? Are there some players that might actually fit that profile? We asked Eric the proverbial Mike Randall question of, do you take Zion or Ja? Hear what position he's on there. It's kind of interesting. We talked a little bit NBA lottery draft order, maybe some of the logistics that took place there. Locally, the Knicks were hoping to get the number 1 pick. They fell to number 3, so we talked about that a tiny bit. Eric gave us his thoughts on Killian Tillie. He gave us his thoughts on Rui Hachimura. He gave us his thoughts on some SEC players, PJ Washington, Grant Williams, Tyler Hero, Nic Claxton, Andrew Nebhart. And then, of course, we got to get to the conference finals in the NBA Eastern Conference with the Bucks and the Raptors. Eric being from Canada, he's very invested in the Raptors. Mike and I being very invested in the Bucks, so we got to talk that as well. So we're hoping that this off-season NBA podcast, college basketball podcast, is exactly what you're looking for. We got you ready on a whole bunch of fronts for the NBA draft. And please, if you haven't visited Eric's work for NBA Canada and at his Twitter handle, at eFawcett7, please do so. He's an unbelievable follow, and he does unbelievable work and is a really, really sharp college basketball / NBA mind that marries those two things really perfectly, so this conversation fit just right. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Really thankful to Eric and the time that he provided for the podcast, and we hope that you guys, this is a 2-commute podcast for you guys. I hope that everybody enjoys it. Cheers, cilantro, grazie, and let's get to the conversation with Eric. Enjoy. All right, listeners, it's NBA draft time, so we're trying to get a number of educated, knowledgeable people on the podcast to talk some NBA draft, and luckily we have one today. We have good friend Eric Fawcett to the podcast. Eric writes for Gator Country. He writes about Florida hoops. He also writes for NBA Canada and does some NBA draft work for them. So, Eric, it's been a long time no talk. How are things up north? How's the college hoops offseason treating you? And has the place come down yet after that Kawhi shot? Have people calmed down about that yet?
Yeah, I certainly haven't. We'll see after they open the series with the Bucks here. But I think, considering what they gave up to get Kawhi, that was with the intention of going pretty deep in the playoffs. So I think there's a few people's jobs on the line if Toronto were to have lost in the second round. So I still think people are pretty excited. And honestly, it was a big surprise to me to actually hear that was the first buzzer beating, the first buzzer beater to win a game 7.
Right.
That kind of surprised me. When you actually think about it, it's there wouldn't actually be that many possibilities for a shot like that in game 7. But because it's just one of those things where you think there's probably been some other game winners at the buzzer in game 7s before. But the fact there actually weren't made this one of the bigger moments in Toronto basketball history, which isn't a lot yet, but for that reason it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think this jumps way ahead of the Vince Carter missed jump shot at the buzzer in the Game 7 against the 76ers. And you mentioned, like, this is now jumps to the front of the line as far as, like, if we're going to talk like Toronto Raptors historical moments, like, I think this might be this jump to the front of the line is number one right now for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been too many, so I think that there's something to be said about that. But also, I do think it's bigger than anything so far, and hopefully they can keep it going.
Right. So we might need to talk a little NBA later in the podcast. We'll get to that a bit later, but I think that's our jumping off point for this NBA draft-ish conversation, right? If we look on the surface of the Final Four for the NBA, the top players on both sides hold like really unique profiles. Steph, 3-year player at Davidson, CJ, 4-year player at Lehigh, Kawhi, 2-year player at San Diego State. Giannis is just, Giannis. Dame, never played in an NCAA tournament while he was at Weber State, all drafted outside the top 5. So Eric, help us out here with this NBA draft knowledge now that we have the lottery in place. Who are a few players that might fit that profile, like sophomore or older, drafted, anywhere from like 5 to 20-ish, that will heavily influence NBA winning in the playoffs like 5 years from now? You recently wrote about Virginia Tech's guard for NBA Canada. Who else might be overlooking in this June NBA draft? And maybe who are a couple of other players that might fit that profile of like Steph, Kawhi, or maybe CJ?
Well, I think when you look at that skill set, I mean, the guys you mentioned are shot maker, and shot maker. Like, those are the guys that the NBA really values right now. So you look at like, hey, who are some of the best shot makers in the draft? And you kind of mentioned in that range, just like past the first level of guys. And I do see Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who you kind of alluded to, just a guy at 6'5" that can just really, really hit shots and can really use screen and roll. So that's the guy I'm really looking at as someone who could have, I'm not sure exactly where he'll go, but I think he could bring a lot of value if he falls. And if a team wants to take him a little higher in the draft, I'd understand it, because what is the NBA game? It's pick and roll after pick and roll. And who's one of the best pick and roll guards? It's Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So I see a lot of value there, but he's also not an elite athlete, so I could see him falling. But that's also where I actually see a lot of CJ McCollum in him, just in the fact that, like, two guys that are not great athletes, but like very smooth and under control. So I think, like, once again, when you're talking about these mid-major guys that have kind of made their way through as not super athletic guards, it's because they can hit shots. And not that Nickeil Alexander's he's obviously not a mid-major player, but he's a shot maker. So I see a lot of value there, and that's the one I'm kind of looking. If you're going to say who's going to be the next Dame Lillard or CJ McCollum, I think that'd be my vote.
And if you haven't checked it out already, please check out Eric's stuff at NBA Canada. He has a great write-up on Alexander Walker, like, that you need to get your eyes on, that might like kind of sway you in the conversation that we're going to right now. And it wouldn't be a Screen to Screener NBA draft podcast if we did not ask the choice. Eric, we need your decision here. Our co-host Mike Randall thinks that all GMs need to ponder the Zion versus Ja decision at the top of the draft. Mike is on board with taking Ja over Zion. Where do you stand? What's your flavor? Defend your stance. Give us where you think the first pick in the Pels should go.
I mean, I do think it's Zion, and I appreciate, just like Mike said, I think you definitely have to think about it. And one of the things you have to start with is who runs the league right now, and it's guys with the ball in their hands, and there's not a lot of big men that kind of really fit that are leading teams right now. So it's for that reason, I think you got to look like, hey, would we rather look at someone who's like a guard versus a big? And for that reason, I do think they should consider Ja. But I do think Zion's got to be number one. And I think just because he's got obviously the massive ceiling just with that athleticism, being a freak like that. But he also, I just think his floor is so small, his floor is so high, just because, I mean, if he never gets a jump shot, I still think he'll be really effective scoring around the inside. And I think his defense is actually really underrated. I really think he's a good defender, and I think he can be just super impactful on that end. I also think his passing is really underrated. I think his passing is excellent for that we didn't always see, just because, Duke's spacing wasn't great. They didn't have a lot of great shooters, and RJ Barrett was commanding the ball out of the time. So, I just think Zion Williamson is a guy with just a really high floor and obviously a high ceiling. And with Ja Morant, I see the high ceiling for sure. There's no question. He's hit shots at sometimes, and he's a really good athlete. But there's still some things that concern me a little bit. I mean, we see all his dunks, and that's awesome for sure. and that they shouldn't, that athleticism shouldn't be forgotten. But, when you actually look at his numbers finishing around the rim and you actually look at all his possessions finishing around the rim, he's actually not an elite finisher around the rim, which would shock a lot of people to see that his numbers are not actually great as a finisher. And that's, when I'm looking at Synergy, the analytics tool that I use and a lot of teams use, those are not adjusted numbers. So when it goes back to, he was missing a lot of shots at the rim, and that's not adjusted for, the level he was playing at. That's just him. So you mean that, and that's him missing shots against some, maybe lesser competition, you could say. So that concerns me a little bit. The jump shot, his numbers actually are, some people are like, yeah, he's an athlete, but he can't shoot. I mean, his numbers actually are not too bad shooting the ball. They're not treacherous.
He can shoot the ball. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the mechanics are not great looking. It maybe concerns me a little bit. So, I'm definitely in on Ja. I'm just not as in his, number one overall pick. But if a team does it, hey, that's bold and I can see it because, you look at a lot of teams right now and it's a guard game. So, saying, hey, do we think that we should take a guard over, a bigger player? Or a team doctor that's terrified of what might happen if Zion comes down wrong one of these times after he, jumps 10 feet in the air. I can see why he'd go Ja. So, I'm going to go Zion. I would be pretty comfortable taking Zion. But yeah, if someone wants to take Ja, hey, that'll make for some fun on draft night.
Listen, I think the conversation is fascinating, and I love that Mike is on the other side of it because he is providing like all the fireworks for this. So I enjoy your breakdown of both. So here's my 2 cents on Zion. I think you brought up a really underrated part of his game. That's on the defensive end. He has unbelievably intelligent hands, but he also can block shots from the backside. He can block shots in front. He's not afraid of contact, and he's not afraid of uncomfortableness on the defensive end, where a lot of these players that we're going to see that are drafted will shy away from that uncomfortableness. Zion kind of embraces it. So will that translate into some foul trouble in the NBA? Yeah, sure, of course. But also his ability to exist in that defensive position where he's really uncomfortable and then come out on the winning side more times than not. I mean, he averaged over 2 steals and over 2 blocks, so I get that part. I think that's the part that maybe people are ignoring and are blinded by, like, the zillion of like dunk highlights that we're going to see. And as far as Ja goes, you brought up the greatest point ever. Listen, the kid can shoot it. It's not like he can't shoot it. So the fact that he's just like a freak athlete, whether you want to go with the Russell Westbrook comparison or whatever it is, he can shoot it a little bit. And if, those numbers get a little bit straighter and a little less crooked, like, look out. If he's going to stretch the floor and be able to break you down and find creases in the defense, then that makes sense. And your point on the synergy numbers is very valid because the lack of length and athleticism that he was trying to finish against, while at Murray State, is going to be vastly different in the NBA. So I think that's also something that I think GMs will pay attention to. All right. Listen, we have an order in the NBA draft now. I know that you were probably watching a little bit. I know that I was watching a little bit. The Pels get the first draft, which is like kind of ironic. Just to give the listeners a little base here, Eric, we're based out of New Jersey. And so a lot of the New York sports talk yesterday, pre-draft lottery, was based around the Knicks packaging the first pick that they were going to get in this draft lottery and then flip that into like Anthony Davis or something else. And now the team that Anthony Davis resides with now holds that number 1 pick that they were going to flip. So what things stood out for you? Anything jump out from the Tuesday order, and what things like kind of caught your attention? Plug in what you will here.
I mean, one thing that I think was really interesting was just the fact that, like lots of teams have tried to tank, obviously. And I think this was a hit to any team that's looking to tank, just because, again, like teams like the Knicks and the Cavs and the Suns and even the Hawks, I mean, tanking didn't work out super well for them just because of the way that now that they've flattened out the odds a lot of the ways. It's just, you can't just come so low in the draft or in the standings and kind of really get a good pick. I mean, the Hawks at 8 right now and the Bulls at 7. I mean, those are some teams that probably expected to be closer to that first overall pick than the 7th and 8th. So I thought that was really interesting. And I mean, of course, like the fact that Zion for Anthony Davis was there's a bunch of teams that kind of you thought, hey, if they get number 1 overall pick, you think they trade it for Anthony Davis? The fact that he even goes to the Pelicans, that certainly makes things interesting. But I see that just the way that I think that Zion is one of those players that, obviously is going to get drafted first, no matter what happens. So it's just interesting to see what they do. But I mean, the intrigue starts at pick 2. So I think it just starts to get really interesting now that you see that, to see what the Grizzlies want to do, who obviously took, have some good front court talent. And then to see the Knicks, if they try to keep that pick, or if they try to get better in a hurry by trading it off. So, it was actually far more interesting than I thought. I mean, I don't get too hyped up for these draft lotteries just because it's always kind of is what it is. I don't know. I don't get too excited, but this one actually made me excited because it turned out a lot weirder than I expected.
Yeah, it definitely had a little juice. Hey, just a quick question. I know it's a little bit off topic and off script. What do you feel about having the kids there at the draft lottery? I felt like that was kind of like a weird optic. I don't know if I was ready for that. Do you think that was like a good move, or do you think that's something they'll stick with moving forward? What do you think?
I probably found it a little on the weird side, which maybe makes you feel like a bad person a little bit to say. But I don't know. I'm the fact they even stretch it to be like a 30-minute program versus something that could happen very quickly. I understand why they have to do it, but right. I could see them shifting things up next season for just to something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe not having the kids there at that moment, because they you get raw emotions on their faces when you see which team gets which pick, and because they're slotted by everybody, including you and I, of where they're going to go. That's I don't think that's the visual that we're going for as far as the NBA draft lottery order. All right, Eric, let's get to some NBA teams. Now the draft order's in place, or the screener favorite is Rui Hachimura. And you had the honor of having your Rui write-up for, at NBA Canada translated into Japanese. This is a 3-part question. Go where you will with it. Number 1, how cool was it to have one of your pieces translated into Japanese? That's unbelievable. Arigato. How will Rui translate to the NBA? And who do you think goes first as far as, Zags go? Do you think somebody's going to take Brandon Clark first, or do you think Rui's going to go first?
First of all, just how cool it was. I honestly think it's probably my favorite thing that I've ever been able to do writing-wise. And just because, I don't know, there's just something so cool about the fact that, there is that community in Japan that is into the NBA and into the draft. And for me to be a Canadian writing something about obviously American college basketball and the NBA getting translated into Japanese for NBA Japan, I just really thought it was cool. And when I saw the translated article, I just scrolled it up and down staring at these characters that I didn't understand whatsoever, just because I thought it was the coolest thing. So it was a really cool opportunity, and I was very, very, very thankful for it. And going back to how we translate to the NBA, I'm really high on Rui. I think he's going to translate really well. I think he's just so difficult to handle in space, and in the NBA, that's kind of when the floor is spaced so well, he's going to have one-on-one matchups that he can just dominate. So I think that's going to really help him. The way he can score so well in the mid-range, I don't think he's going to be given the opportunity to just shoot a ton of pull-up mid-range twos and stuff. But I think, again, you look at these NBA playoffs, and there's been a lot of talk about the mid-range jump shot, and I think a lot of it is kind of overblown from the side of you should never take them, to the people that say, oh, hey, look at Portland beating teams by just shooting a ton of mid-range twos. My kind of thought is on the matter is, in the NBA, you get a lot of tie games and 1-point games at the end of the game, and you need 2 points or 3 points on the board. It doesn't matter. You need the highest percentage shot, and someone like Rui Hachimura who can get a matchup he wants and just rise above a defender and hit a shot from anywhere inside the arc. I think that brings a lot of value in late game scenarios. So I think it'll be a matchup nightmare. I think he's got some work to do defensively, but he's got all the athletic kind of tools. And I mean, he's just still learning the language to be able to be coached. So I'm a really big fan of his game. And the question about who goes higher between him and his teammates, Clark, is just very, very interesting, just because I think you've got Rui, who's a little bit of, being kind of like a skilled offensive player who is kind of a shot maker, but does a lot in the mid range. It makes him I feel like he's generally quite liked. I think there's people maybe you and I that are higher on him. Right. But Brandon Clark's a little bit of a cult hero, I feel, where some people, some people really, really like him and honestly think he should be in the mix for a top 5 pick. There's other people that say hey, he's not that big. We're not sure he's really going to keep shooting at the NBA level, and see him more out of the lottery even. So I think he's got the wider range, because I think some people might look at him and say hey, he's Jordan Bell. He's an excellent defender, But, you just saw like Jordan Bell can't get on the floor right now for the Warriors. And obviously, that's the Warriors, but they might see a little bit of that in him. But there's going to be some teams that think like, yeah, he's going to be able to make plays and hit shots. So while it wouldn't shock me if Brandon Clark goes first, I would have to say I think Rui goes higher just because I think he might be a little bit of a safer pick. And I also think that, he's got, I would say, really, really good size for the NBA 4. So a player who can score and has good positional size, I think I'll take him over someone who like Brandon Clark, who's doesn't have great positional size, and maybe there are a little bit of question marks about his ability to score.
Wow, that is like a phenomenal breakdown. I don't know if you're going to get a better answer than that anywhere. Thank you, Eric. That's perfect. Here's just my 2 cents on Rui. I'm very high on him as well. I mean, I think we're both in the same camp here. The fact that he shoots it 60% from the field should not be ignored. Like you mentioned shot makers earlier in the podcast. In some strange way, that's exactly what Rui is. He's a shot maker. He can make the mid-range shot. We talked about like the validity of long twos or the mid-range shot. If you need that shot and you need a bucket, and that's where his skill set resides, give him the ball in that area. And I think just overall, as far as like the Gonzaga profile of player, whether it be Clark or Rui, I think the fact that Zach Collins is balling out for Portland off the bench in a very needed role due to injury, and the fact that Sabonis did unbelievable work for the Pacers once Vic went out with his injury and really balled out there. I think that does nothing but a gigantic favor for anybody that is a Bulldog that's going to be in this draft, because obviously whatever they're schooling up in Spokane is translating really well to the NBA. So I think I agree with your validity. I agree with your variance as far as where Clark might be. I feel like he's a little bit of like Zaire Smith, except taller from last year, where people are just in love with his athleticism and his skill set and kind of don't know what to do with him. And so you want to take a flyer on him at some point in the lottery, but maybe you don't. But I think because of the overall success of Zag's players recently in the NBA, I think both of these players will get looked at somewhere in the lottery and definitely first round picks. And, Eric, speaking of the Zags, we're very, Gonzaga centric here on the pod, for better or for worse. So do us a favor here. Have your trained NBA eyes go on Killian Tillie. Just one season ago, the big man was banging threes like at an uncommon rate in Las Vegas for the WCC tournament. And a few injuries later, we now hold doubt about his NBA stock. I'm all in. Co-host Mike Randall from the Action Network is calling him for to return to campus and just go dominate this year with Zach Collins and Sabonis doing their work. Where are you at with Killian Tillie? Do you think that he has some NBA skill sets, and has he been healthy enough to have a team, draft him, whether it be first round or second round?
Yeah, the injury is interesting because he is someone that I think would have had to kind of go to the combine and show out a little bit solidly and go through some individual workouts to kind of show teams that he was the real deal. I mean, he's just an absolute killer from the 3-point line. And I mean, I think there's so much kind of talk about the 3-point shot that I think is exaggerated. Like it gets so tossed around that like, this guy's a good 3-point shooter. This guy's a good 3-point shooter. This guy can hit the three. There's just so many players that you just talk about. And when people kind of run down their skill set, it starts with, can hit the three. And then they go on whatever and say whatever else. And, there's people that are like 36% from the line and people will be like, yeah, he can hit the 3-point shot. And you know what? They can hit the 3-point shot, I guess. Right. You look at his career at Gonzaga, he's a career 47% 3-point shooter. Like right. That is nuts. Like that is another level of 3-point shooting. So you see a guy like that who's obviously tall and long, and he can just knock down the shot at that kind of clip, and he's done it over 3 seasons. I know it's been short. He hasn't had a ton of attempts just because of the injury, but he's been consistently shooting the ball at a really, really high level. And for that reason, I think some teams will be intrigued. He's not super strong. He's pretty slight. The big question I have, and it's still just tough when I watch them play, is I do wonder just how he could kind of guard out in space, and when he has to guard pick and rolls, how that would work. And that's something that I would kind of wish I saw him in the combine and kind of isolated in those sets. I'm going back to watching with Gonzaga. I mean, they played so well they're so connected defensively, and perhaps you should say like, hey, he was played really well in that scheme, and there's something to be said of him kind of contributing to that. But I'd like to see him maybe in another scenario, and that's kind of one of those things. Like Gonzaga's so good, I almost wish I saw him with a worst group of talent just to see what he could do. But I would say he's a second round pick if he stays in, maybe middle of the second round. I mean, I just don't know how many big men are going to, get taken in the draft. I just think it gets to be fewer and fewer every year. And the ones people take are kind of the ones that you think are just like hyper athletes. And that's kind of the other question for Tillie is, do you think he's just going to be a 5 or do you think he'd play some 4? I mean, I probably think he's more like just a 5. And right. If so, do you think he's going to be defending at that level? Because that's where the NBA just puts a premium on defense. And while his shot making is ridiculous, there's going to be some teams that you would rather just have your run and jump big man there. So I could kind of go either way. But, I do think he would get drafted. So I probably think it would be in the second round. So, hey, if that's what he wants to do, that's good for him. If not, hey, go back to school, maybe add some strength and, be a late first next year.
I agree. I'm almost on Mike's side here where maybe he just go back and get it right and get healthy and put up 20 points a game, maybe have like that Kyle Wiltshire like type of year where you're going to go off and just put up giant numbers. All right. Enough of the Zag rundown. Enough of that. Let's dive deep into your end of the pool, right? The SEC will have a number of names called in June. We're going to have Kentucky. We're going to have Tennessee. We're going to have Georgia. All of those teams are going to have student athletes' names called out. My co-host, Mike Randall, just adores PJ Washington. So I guess let's start there. He's a guy that he mentioned earlier that might fit the Kawhi, Dame, Curry, CJ profile, a guy that hung around for a sophomore year, returned to get his game straight, get his body straight, and be ready for the NBA level. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about Grant Williams or Tyler Hero as well. So, go where your SEC eyes go here and give us a little rundown of guys that you've really keyed into and have seen firsthand. How are they going to break down in this draft, and what's your profile of them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, PJ Washington, he did really well for himself. And I think that that's something that kind of shouldn't be forgotten because people always talk about going back and improving your stock. And I mean, I just said that with Killian Tillie. I just said, yeah, you should come back and improve his stock. But I mean, that's not always easy to do. And that doesn't always happen. Guys do come back and hurt their stock even more. That's a risk. So the fact that he did come back and really helped himself, I think that's really impressive. But I mean, the SEC has been recruiting really well recently. They've got some good coaches, and therefore you're going to have a lot of these pretty interesting players with a lot of talent. So there's definitely PJ Washington. Tyler Hero is a player I really like. I know he didn't. One thing I thought was really weird is everyone talked about him being just like a shooter, and I think he's pigeonholed for that reason a lot of times. But I mean, you look at his numbers through high school and colleges. He never really was an excellent shooter, but I think he brings value in a lot of other ways. I thought he actually defended really well when I saw him play. I thought he made plays off the dribble really well. And while I don't really think he's a shooter, and I just think that that's kind of a stereotype that people add of him. So he's a player that I'm really interested to see where he goes. But the way that he was able to kind of stand out on a Kentucky team that obviously had a lot of talent, I thought that was pretty impressive. And then obviously his teammate Keldon Johnson. I mean, he's just kind of that like standard lottery-ish wing that just gets taken because of his athleticism. Right. Just the benchmark athleticism is people are going to see a player like that and then take him immediately. And I thought he did some things pretty well and showed some flash with it in terms of a skill standpoint. So that's another guy that I'm really interested to see because there's wings like that maybe don't blow you away, but there's just such a premium on wings in the NBA that teams are just willing to take those guys higher than you think. So while Keldon Johnson, I don't see him as a lottery guy. I see him as maybe someone later in the first round. It just seems like every year in the draft, there's wings taken that are like, oh, that's higher than I expected. But because teams are on wings, that's going to happen. And then, I mean, one more that I'm just obviously really interested to see where he goes is Grant Williams, because that's a guy who, coming out of high school, that's not someone you would have expected being a draft pick. And I think that's to see those guys developing like that. Obviously, the regular season success Tennessee had was a lot of what he had to do. And for a player like that, I mean, you see Jared Dudley and PJ Tucker were two of these, 6'6", 6'7", stocky forwards that had really good playoffs. Obviously, Jared Dudley only played in one round, but he really kind of made his presence felt as a physical, just a physical front court player that's, obviously not that long, and not even particularly that skilled. I mean, Grant Williams is probably more skilled than him. And then PJ Tucker was a guy who played a very, very important role in a Houston team that definitely challenge Golden State at times. And I think if a team's looking for one of those players, I think Grant Williams is the best in the draft for that kind of role, and someone who can step in immediately. And just one other thing too about Grant Williams being a bit of an older player. What I was going to say is, so I mean, he's a junior, but he's young for his class. So Grant Williams is only 20 years old. He's still 20. Right. And I think people forget about that too. And it's something I didn't notice until I kind of was looking at his profiles. It's like, I thought he was an older guy. I mean, he's experienced, but he's still only 20. And I mean, there's still some freshmen that are 20 years old. So I mean, for example, I was looking at a profile for Lugens Dort, a freshman. I mean, he's only a couple months younger than Grant Williams. And obviously Grant Williams is a junior. So it's just kind of funny how we do look at the classes sometimes, and we just kind of equate that with their age. And it's like, oh no, a lot of times that, there's guys that are, that are upperclassmen, they're actually younger than you think. And then there's some of these guys that you're like, oh, there's a freshman, they've got a lot to, they've got so much to grow, and they're not finished products and have such high ceilings. And then you're like, oh wait, they're actually 20 years old in their freshman year of college. So, So anyways, those are some SEC guys that I find pretty interesting.
And then I guess one other question about one other SEC guy, Eric, is I kind of like Nic Claxton from Georgia. Like, how many top recruits did Tom Crean get to look at his program after giving so much freedom to the 6'11" sophomore on both ends of the floor? He can shoot a little bit, handle, pass. He has a little bit of touch. He can defend at the rim. I mean, I think if you're in the 20s or the late 20s, you take a look at him, right, Eric?
I would definitely take a look at him. And in a draft like this, I don't know how many. I do think this is kind of a weaker draft year, and I think that there's a lot of guys that you probably think are first roundish guys that I'm not super intrigued with. But then I see, like a Nic Claxton, and I think like, hey, there's a player who can really get it done on the inside. He could probably fill out his frame a lot more. But even without doing that, I mean, he could block shots, he could rebound, and he could really score on the inside. So he's a player that kind of, once again, just looking for kind of versatility and someone who can kind of switch out and guard different positions. I think that, that's someone you really look at. So I'd be interested if he kind of stays in. Yeah, I think maybe late first, early second, somewhere in there. But he's a guy that in an individual workout, some team could really fall in love with him.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things where you take a look at his measurables, he shoots the lights out in individual shooting drills, and you're like, all right, I really like this guy. And then boom, he ends up with a promise somewhere in the late first round, just like you mentioned. All right, listen, we need to talk your guy. We need to go there. We need to talk Florida point guard Andrew Nembhard. He's a little bit longer than you think, better shooter than you think, great defender, high game IQ, Monte Morris-ish. He's turning heads in the G League Combine. Are you worried that he might not return to your Florida Gators, or is he just sneaky this good? What are you hearing about Nembhard? Give the listeners a little rundown on the Florida freshman point guard.
Yeah, I mean, I called before the season that I thought he was going to be one and done, and that was not a popular decision, or that was not a take that many people thought was very legitimate. And while I don't think he's going to stay in the draft, him just going to the G League Combine, kind of the second wave of guys. I thought that kind of just showed that he's got some great potential, and I think he'll come back, but I think he'll only have one more year at Florida. So the one thing that I'm pretty comfortable in saying is, I mean, even as a freshman, I think he was the best passer in college basketball. I truly believe that, and I think that his vision is just enough that a team's going to take a chance on him. But he found a way in college to be a pretty good defender, just because he's so intelligent, but he's not a great athlete. He's that really hurts him from an NBA standpoint. And he's also not a great finisher inside. He got better near the second half of the season, but the one skill that really hurts him right now is when he catches and shoots, he's able to hit some jump shots, but he doesn't shoot off the dribble at all. He really struggles to shoot off the dribble, and that is something that's just more and more over the last few years. I think that I've kind of realized that when you look at guys that translate to the league or don't at the guard spot, it's who can shoot off the dribble. So his vision is going to be, his vision is just incredible. And I think that if he gets, once he gets a little bit stronger next year and probably more athletic because of it, I think he'll be in a lot better position and will probably get drafted. And he was another one of the guys that, like many, was a reclassification. So he ended up going to college a little bit earlier for that reason, wasn't super physically developed. So I do think he'll come back to Florida, and then I think he'll go to the draft next year, and hopefully he can have a productive year at Florida that gets him in a good spot.
Well, let's hope that I think his vision is really special too. I'm with you on that, Eric. And I think that's the thing that's going to kind of set him apart. And I think if he can come back and, like you mentioned, get a little bit more efficient off the dribble, even off like pick and pops, and he can show some efficiency at that mid-range game or maybe even isolated on the three-point line, I think that would do 100 favors for him as far as the NBA draft goes. But he does have an NBA skill set that is ready, and that's his vision and his passing for sure. So I hope you guys get one more season of him. All right, Eric. I love a few guys in this draft. I love Kobe White. I love Rui, who we talked about earlier, Claxton, Dylan Windler. I love THC from Iowa State, KZ from Stanford. Help the listeners out here. Who are 2 or 3 players that you think might pop with the proper fit, who might be hidden a little bit down the draft board after watching a little film on them, and just like a couple of guys that really caught your eye where you were like, I think that guy's definitely an NBA player, and I think he's going to get drafted a little bit later than people think. So who are 2 or 3 players that we should pay attention to? Who are 2 or 3 names that we should pay attention to as we get closer to the NBA draft in June?
Well, PJ Washington, talking about him before, just as
right.
He's someone who's kind of gotten a lot of traction recently. I look at him and I like him, but I say, who's a similar player that I like a lot more is Mfiondu Kabengele from Florida State. He's bigger, he's even stronger, and he's more athletic, and I think he has better, even maybe a little bit better, similar offensive instinct, but while bringing a better kind of effort to the defensive end just because of his size. So I just see, I don't even want to take anything away from PJ Washington, but just looking at that where I say like, PJ Washington is maybe a little bit small positionally. I'm not exactly sure entirely where he'll fit, but I don't think that'll be a major problem for him. But then I see, once again, Kabengele, and I say, hey, he brings a lot of the same physicality, but more because he's bigger. Probably doesn't pass the ball as well as Washington, but he can finish even better inside. And that's someone who I could see going down the line. That you just look and say like, wow, I think that Kabengele was a steal in the 20s or so. And then someone that I also think that's going to be really interesting that I just think is going to fit is Cameron Johnson from North Carolina. And I think once again, teams are always looking for these. Like once again, what happens every single trade deadline in the NBA? People look at the contending teams and they say, what do they need? And every single time the analysts on TNT or whatever you're watching say like, they need a wing who can shoot. And that is for every single team, every trade deadline. And you just say like, who are some of these wings that can kind of fall down the draft a little bit? That are, have length that can shoot, and that's Cameron Johnson. And one thing that I also think doesn't get kind of talked about enough when it comes to the draft and when it comes to these veteran players is so many of these teams, especially kind of that are in the playoff picture, are just so cash strapped and so up against the salary cap that they really need guys on rookie scale deals to contribute. And I see Cameron Johnson, maybe goes late in the first-ish. That's a guy who's, because he's a senior, he's a veteran college guy who can probably come in and provide minutes right away at the NBA. And though he doesn't have a high ceiling, he's someone who can come in on a rookie scale deal, making, $1.4 million against your cap. But he can hit shots and provide value there. So I just see some of those veteran guys. I mean, Grant Williams, you could almost say the same about him. Right. Just as these veteran guys who will fall because they're kind of veteran and don't have that flash a little bit. And I think that could be someone who kind of you see in the playoffs. And the other thing too is because he gets drafted, these guys usually get drafted later in the first round. That means they go to a team that's probably in a playoff team.
Exactly.
Return to the playoffs. And just one more guy that I really do like, and I know his offensive game is a great. I still really like Matisse Thybulle, and think that he is going to find a way to just be a good player on a good team. You do see that a lot of teams have guys that are just like truly out there to defend at the wing, and a lot of teams kind of have spots in that. Usually in their starting lineup, that's where we're seeing a lot of the 2-guard spot, where it used to be that everyone wanted a 2-guard that could just sit there and catch and shoot. There's still guys like that in the league. But a lot of times now people want guys that can just defend and switch between the 2 and the 3, or sometimes even take the other team's point guard. And I really think Matisse Thybulle is a guy that can kind of fill that role. So that's another guy who, again, he might get drafted late in the first round. If he gets drafted late in the first round, that means he's going to go to a team like a Milwaukee or a Toronto or a Houston. And those teams are the teams that have money tied up at the top of their rosters. Need some guys on rookie scale deals to fill out their rotation. And it could be some of these veteran guys.
Look, I love the breakdown there. I think Cam Johnson, and we'll just go with the UNC corollary there. I think there could be Wayne Ellington. I mean, look how long he's played in the league as a shooter and has been passed around over and over again. And as far as Thybulle goes, like, of course, he's athletic. He's going to guard multiple positions. He's going to be able to defend at the point of attack and maybe on the wing as well. That makes perfect sense as well. All right, Eric, we'll get you out of here on this one. You're invested in the Raptors. I'm invested in the Bucks. Let's hack this out. Who's going to the NBA Finals? It's We Are the North versus Fear the Deer. Break it down for the listeners. I know that we're both biased here, but give us a quick NBA Conference Finals rundown. Who's gonna maybe play the Warriors in the finals?
I mean, for the sake of the podcast, I wish I could argue with you more and be more pro Raptors. But I mean,
yes!
I mean they played 4 games in the regular season. Milwaukee won 3 of them. Handled them pretty solidly. Then you look at the playoffs. One team has skated through easily. That's the Bucks, and one team has struggled and not been playing their best basketball, and that's the Raptors. So, I see the regular season. Milwaukee, won that series easily, I'd say. And then you say, who's playing their best basketball right now? It's certainly not the Raptors. They're kind of just coasting along, and Kawhi Leonard is dragging the team on his back to win some games. So, and then you see that, I think Milwaukee is just clicking. And you know what? I think that the Raptors had something going really well early when they had Serge Ibaka and Jonas Valanciunas as their center position. That was their rotation. It was looking really good. And then they decided to, trade Valanciunas, who was looking good, and DeLon Wright, a very key part of the bench, to get slightly better in Marc Gasol at the center spot. And yes, he is better than Jonas Valanciunas. But that took, that put Serge Ibaka on the bench. He started to play a lot worse when his role changed. Obviously, Marc Gasol brings he brings some good kind of defensive IQ and can pass the ball, hit some jump shots. But I think sacrificing what was a really, really good bench and a really, really good just rotation where everyone filled a slot. I don't think that was good for the team. And I think that he's going to have to sag in the paint, and Brook Lopez is going to rain threes on him all series. And I don't like this one for the Raptors.
It's funny they mentioned Brook Lopez because that's the name that came up in like our, between Mike and our friends that are out with the Bucks on our text chain. So here's my 2 cents on this. I think home court is going to reign supreme here. And I also think that having Malcolm Brogdon back, whether it be in the starting lineup later in the series or coming off the bench, I think that's an unbelievable advantage and something that the Bucks didn't have a card to play. Now that they have that card to play, I think that's going to play huge dividends for them. And I also think that just to talk your end a tiny bit, everybody's really scared of Kawhi. He's playing at I'm the best player on the planet level currently right now. And I think because he's operating in that stratosphere, that's something that is frightening for any team, including the Bucks. I think home court might help sway this decision. And I also think having Malcolm back healthy is also going to be in favor as well. And you mentioned DeLon Wright. I think, we mentioned PJ Washington earlier. I think that's like a perfect corollary right there. So listeners, there's your breakdown. Eric gave you everything you needed to know for the NBA draft. He even gave you some NBA Conference Finals breakdown. Please follow his stuff. Gator Country. He talks Florida hoops there. NBA Canada. He does his NBA draft work there. And please don't forget to give him a follow at eFawcett7, capital E, in the Twitter handle. Eric, good to catch up, man. I'm glad things are going well, and please enjoy the conference finals. We'll catch up soon, and maybe talk some smack in case if the Raptors get out on the Bucks early here. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath for that to happen, but I'll be sure to let you know if the Raptors can steal one on the road here.
All right, sounds good, Eric. Thanks a lot. Good catching up with you. We'll catch up with you before you know it. Listeners, hope you enjoyed the conversation, and Mike and I will catch up with you before you know it. Cheers, cilantro, grazie, everybody.